This week, public officials have warned EV owners in the path of Hurricane Helene to drive their vehicles to higher ground. We'll dig into the fire risk of electric vehicles and floods. Because nothing ruins a good hurricane like your car going up in flames, Brian.
California signs a new law that will make the grid smarter. Next up, massive changes to education once government officials realize they can just pass a law that makes everyone smarter.
The world's most prominent solar analyst, Jenny Chase, has come out with her annual tweet storm on the state of solar. When you're in the solar business, throwing shade is part of the job.
Meta, Facebook's parent company, is looking to clean up concrete. Concrete traditionally creates a lot of CO2 emissions, and Facebook wants their AI data centers to be more green. As an added bonus, cement overshoes in the murder industry will also get cleaner.
All that and more this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And also this week's show, Ford will now give you a home charger with your vehicle and pay to have it installed in your home, and they're doing it a little bit better than everyone else who does that or has done it. The governor of California kiboshes a Solar on Schools program, and we launch our Patreon membership program and announce the perks that our supporters will receive. Brian.
Well, that's fantastic. I can't wait to see what happens with that.
Yeah, it should be interesting. And I'm already feeling a community vibe from it, you know. The Patreon page might be the place to hang out in the future. We'll see. Yeah.
Okay, so I got back from Milwaukee. The show is a day late, and I said last week I was a little worried.
You warned us.
I warned everybody. We had a tight connection in Minneapolis to catch our connecting flight. It was only an hour and a bit, and I thought, yeah, if anything goes a little bit wrong, we're going to miss that flight. So turns out we got to our flight in plenty of time, and then WestJet canceled our flight.
Boo, WestJet.
Yeah. And, you know, WestJet, Air Canada, I complain about them a lot because they're terrible. But, you know, they're also fairly small airlines compared to some of the big ones around the world. So the problem is if they cancel your flight, the soonest they can get you home is 2 days because they just don't have enough flights to put everybody on. So they wanted us to fly the next day through Edmonton in the evening, stay overnight in Edmonton, and then fly to Regina the next evening, coming home at about midnight Wednesday. So if we had actually gone with that plan, I still wouldn't be home yet. We'd be in Edmonton right now, killing 24 hours.
Would the hotel be at your expense?
They have hotel vouchers and stuff, you know, that they said they were going to do. But anyway, we just canceled it, and we managed to get a flight on Air Canada through Toronto. So we still had to fly 2 flights instead of 1. Like normally it would just be Minneapolis straight home to Regina. But, you know, there was one available, and it got us home yesterday afternoon in plenty of time.
Did you get a refund, or will you get a refund on your plane, or how's that going to work?
Well, you're supposed to get a refund. Like it says, you know, I don't know. Sometimes they'll just give you credit.
Credit's not still good.
Yeah, given that it's all their fault, I'm hoping we get 100% refund. But it's in a way you're up to their mercy, and if they don't do what you want, you file a complaint. We did that once. We filed a complaint about one of our canceled flights, and we never heard anything, and we weren't on the ball enough to follow up.
That's too bad.
Yeah,
well, how was your trip overall, though? Milwaukee sounds exciting.
Yeah,
surprisingly
overall,
exciting. You know, it's a swing state.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
Wisconsin is a swing state. Boy, you really are tuned out from the election.
Oh, yeah. No, I completely am, yeah. And I like it that way
because
we can't vote.
The guy from The Apprentice is running for president? The guy from The Apprentice is running for president. I kid you not.
Yeah, well, we're Canadian. We can't vote. And if we could vote, we would have decided to vote for roughly 10 years ago. So yes. I am not interested in any of the debate that's going on. But yeah, Milwaukee is fabulous. I have tons to say about it. So much so, I think I'm going to save most of it for a bonus episode, which we're going to start doing now that we're launching our Patreon, because a lot of it's pretty far off topic of clean energy. So I'm going to just stick to the stuff right now that we saw in Milwaukee that relates to clean energy.
Sure.
First of all, not many EVs in Wisconsin, and I'm pretty sure I said that previously when we drove through there on our way to Indiana. It's just, I don't know, there's just way fewer than there are even here in the middle of the Canadian prairies. You just don't see a lot of EVs.
Well, it is a northern state, so it's cold, and it is, I don't know, largely rural as well as having population centers.
On our road trip, it was kind of south of Wisconsin where we started to see more EVs. But they do have some electric buses in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, which we saw driving around, which were nice and quiet. And that was great. They do have a bit of a streetcar system with electric streetcars, trolley cars. That was kind of interesting, but I don't think it's that big or that extensive. And they had public electric bike rentals like they do in big cities where you can... they have a series of like 10 bikes parked and you can, I don't know how it works. You get a membership or you put in a credit card or something and you can rent bicycles. And these ones were also electric, which was cool.
That's nice. That's fairly progressive on the government's part, or the local government's part. Maybe the city council is more progressive than the state government.
But yeah, that was about it.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. We'll hear more on a bonus podcast that'll come out, because we're not just going to talk about clean energy. Who knows what we'll talk about in our bonus podcast. I'm actually looking forward to it. And I'm a little bit worried that they're going to be better than this podcast, like without any restrictions. Like suddenly this will become the bonus podcast. I don't know.
Can we swear on the bonus podcast?
Yeah, I guess we can.
Okay.
Well, get that out of my system. So I'm used to seeing daily pictures of EVs that are totaled. Like I belong to, for instance, a Bolt EV group, because I have a Bolt, a Nissan Leaf group, because I have a Nissan Leaf. And you always see people posting, "Oh, my beloved car. I loved it. It was the best car I ever had. She's gone. I don't know what I'm going to do." This happens daily, Brian.
Wow.
But this time I saw one that was riddled with bullets and totaled. Somebody took it on a joyride, and they didn't explain why it was riddled with bullets from a joyride. Was it a gangster thing where people were shooting at people in the street and getting shot back, or did the police shoot them because they stole a car? Either way, the poor Bolt is riddled with bullets after a 10-minute joyride. And I also wanted to say happy 100th birthday to solar pioneer Jimmy Carter, former president of the United States, who turned 100 earlier this week. And he put solar panels famously on the White House. As you've pointed out, they were thermal solar and for heating hot water. And then Reagan, of course, took them down. Isn't that just the way things go to this day?
Yeah, because it was a very long time ago and solar thermal was more of a thing. But yeah, we were eating dinner at a restaurant in Milwaukee and there was a TV in the background and Jimmy Carter's face was popping up on the TV. And I thought, oh no. He must have died. I poor Jimmy Carter. And then of course I found out, no, he turned 100. That's amazing.
It is amazing. He is very, very old and probably not in great cognitive shape at this point, or physical shape, that's for sure. Chuck sent us a note on this. Ford is now offering to install your home charger for you, and there's no cost ceiling, which is interesting. The limits they place on this is that the charger has to be within 80 feet of your electrical panel and no trenching to your garage. If you have to run higher voltage to your garage where you want the charger, they're not going to trench for you. And Tom from State of Charge suggests hiring teenagers or slave labor teenagers. You own the teenagers yourself. They live in your house. You would have to pay that extra expense. So yeah, Tom points out that automakers have been giving out free charging for 2 years. Like that was an option with my Bolt to have free charging for 2 years. I would have never used it. All of it, I wouldn't have got $1,500 worth that I got for my charger installation. I actually upgraded my charger installation rather than having a completely new installation.
Yeah, so you could choose between 2 years of free charging or
but
charging.
He points out that all the chargers are full of those people who have free charging. Like your Volkswagen people are at Electrify America, and they're charging there because it's free. But it's also not giving them the experience that they should have. They should have that experience of charging at home, of waking up to a full charge. This is like worse than a gas station, having to go. By the way, I was making video content when I went to Saskatoon, because I have to do that now for reasons I'll get into later. And I was making a video of my son pumping gas. It took him forever, which he just happened to take forever. Like the payment system didn't work, and he picked up he picked up the diesel thing by mistake, and that was reset everything. He had to start again, but the whole thing only took 4 minutes. Seemed like forever, but he was full of his little car was full of gas in 4 minutes. But still, it was all I had to do was plug in and walk away. So yeah, charging makes people at home happier, and it's a better option to make people happy, because I would not want to go, as much as I'd like to save the money, I would not like to go spend an hour or something, charging my vehicle every time I charge it. I would just want to plug it at home a couple times a week, and that would be great. Yeah, just also I'm so pissed off at the local government or opposition party here that may form government that they're not climate friendly. The people think of them as center left, and they're really being populist center now, I would think, and they're reducing the gasoline tax, promising to take away the road tax on vehicles to save people money, $350 a year. It's not going to save you and I anything because we already did the right thing. We moved to EVs and we're going to get punished for it. And we pay $150 a year for a road tax on our EV. They haven't mentioned what they're going to do about that. They better reverse that. I'm getting mad. And, I got so mad that I looked up what it would take to run for the Green Party. And the whole application is what skeletons do you have in your closet? I have way too many. Way too many.
Yeah.
I have some good things, but some bad things.
I mean, just the things that I have on video could sink your campaign.
That's very much correct. So that's all that's new with me.
All right. Well, let's get on with the show here. In California, so they have passed a new law. This is from Electrek, a new law to do with the grid. So as we know that grids are going to have to get smarter as we get more solar, more wind, more variable renewables on the grid. So the California governor, Gavin Newsom, has signed a new law directing the state to upgrade its electrical transmission system through the use of smart grid technologies. And the simplest thing, which is replacing old wires with newer high-tech ones in order to get better throughput, as well as putting things like monitors in the cable. Like, everything can just get smarter and kind of needs to get smarter. And this law basically just sort of, forces the state to go that way. Advanced power flow control systems that can help channel the power to where it's needed. Dynamic line rating systems, those things like they monitor weather. And, a lot of it is just optimization software. But it says that, according to the article, these technologies can reduce the grid congestion by about 40% or more, reducing the need for curtailment, which is when there's too many renewables on the grid. And yeah, I don't know. The simplest thing, though, is replacing the old wires. Like, the old wires are very heavy and thick, but they can use new materials like carbon fiber and end up with transmission lines that can, have better throughput for power, as well as, like I said, including sensors. You can just include sensors now on the wires to, just sort of monitor these things.
I've heard that you can, put as much as 3 times the power through some grids if you do this sort of approach, because a lot of it has to do with the lines expanding as they get hot, as the more they get used, and it's hot weather that's happening because air conditioning demand is up. Then when the wires expand and they fold and they hit a tree, then there's a power outage. So you got to control that. You don't want too much sag. You don't want them to get certain equipment to get too hot. But these monitors, which actually cost a lot of money from the ones that I saw written about, will help that, but it's worth it because, grids are expensive things. And, we talked about how batteries cost a lot of money to put on the grid, but they save so much money just from stabilizing it that that is effective. So yeah, that's interesting. And just replacing the wires, because the hard part is getting that land approved. That takes, up to 10 years in the United States. And if you can put more power on the same system, then you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to build the pylons or anything like that. And you just replace the wires and use the wires better, monitor the temperature and the weather, and hopefully less forest fires caused by power lines.
Yeah, that sag that we always see in power transmission lines is something that is very much calculated, and the weight of the cables has to do with, you want them to sag in a certain way, but not have them sag too much. And, it can be somewhat complicated to figure out the right formula, but, new things like carbon fiber apparently are a big help for that. So that's the good news from California. The bad news is that pretty much at the same time Gavin Newsom passed that bill, also vetoed the school solar bill. So there was a bill that was going to make rooftop solar on schools better, essentially making it a net metering program for schools where you would get the same money back from your power that you have to pay for it, which is a net metering system, which is
so it would cost the grid, it would cost the government money to do that. They'd have to subsidize it, but at the same time, the schools would be able to do it and then ultimately save money, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, the reason given for not doing this is usually that, I don't know, it's like there's a sense that it's not fair then. The people who have solar panels are in a way getting a better deal. And then the other people that don't have solar panels are having to pay for it. But, it's really kind of flawed thinking because, first of all, like we're in a climate emergency. So, if a school wants to save a bit of money on their power bill and help the planet, we should allow them to do that. I mean, really, the only reason to stop it is if they're worried about too much rooftop solar getting on the grid. But, we talk about that in Australia all the time, and there's another story coming up about that later in the show. There is ways to deal with that and mitigate that. Same thing happened around here. You and I signed up for solar where we live 5-6 years ago now, and it's a net metering system. So we pay the same amount that the grid pays us for the power. And they use that same reasoning to get rid of that program. So around here, you only get paid half of the rate. It's like you get a wholesale rate while paying a retail rate. But yeah, it's all based on this notion that, for 100 years, we've had to buy our power from utilities. There was no other choice. Well, now we have a choice and we should be given that choice. There's no law that says that we have to get all of our power for the rest of eternity from a big power utility.
Yeah. The fact that we use the utilities as a battery, to put out our excess electricity, like right now, it's, the sun has peaked out here in North Regina and, my panels are probably putting out more than I'm using. Clean Energy Show is on this end is powered by the sun today, and that's great. But that extra electricity is not going to go into my car because I don't have a smart EV charger or something. But that's something to consider as well, is putting that into a car if you can't afford, a Tesla Powerwall or something like that.
Yeah, and in the future, home batteries will get cheaper. So if you're annoyed at your power utility for not giving you the full rate for your power in the future, you can just buy a battery and skip the utility altogether, which would be too bad. It's better if we're all connected to the grid.
Yeah, and a lot of people do have batteries, and especially in the UK. I was reading a statistic the other day, and I think we'll get to that in the show. A lot of people are getting batteries with their solar in some parts of the world now, especially in places like the UK.
Yeah, and places where the power is traditionally kind of expensive, a battery makes more sense.
Well, I want to talk about flooded EVs because this has been a headline. It started with the governor of Florida. I won't mention his name because I may burst into flames. He was warning people to drive their electric vehicles to higher ground. And I thought, well, that's crazy. But I guess flooding does affect electric vehicles, but it also, it'll kill. What they were worried about is them bursting into flames if they're flooded. And the salt water that comes in from the ocean surge in a hurricane could, cause an electrical arc inside the battery. If it corrodes things, it gets inside the battery. That could happen. But I have statistics for you that will set your mind at ease. But the worry was that they would catch fire, and then a house would catch fire, and then the emergency responders would be even busier, and they didn't want that, which is understandable. But they say not to drive a car that's been underwater until it's been checked out by professionals. So if your car is one of those people who have been flooded in the United States, I'm sorry, but you should probably not park it near your house, not park it in your house. Consider it a possibility. Although small, it's like 1 in 100 or something like that. I'll get to that in a moment. But it is possible. So, yeah, there's been other floods and statistics from that, which I'll get to. It's a good idea to park a flooded vehicle at least 50 feet away from buildings and, or higher ground, which makes sense if you don't want to lose your car. But you would lose your normal car to being flooded in water as well, as you know.
Yeah, well, often anti-EV people, they'll say, oh, EVs, they catch on fire all the time, which of course is not true. Gasoline cars catch fire way more often, but in a flood, a gas car wouldn't catch fire, whereas with an EV, it is a slight possibility.
So it can create a connection between the battery's positive and negative sides, causing it to short out and possibly catch fires. They are designed to be safe in submersion, however, so most have seals to prevent any moisture from getting in, which is true. But apparently, salt water is extraordinarily corrosive, so those seals can fail. Now, we know a guy in the Saskatchewan EV community who boldly drove his Tesla through a flooded street a couple years ago after a thunderstorm with heavy rain, and, to show off, and he totaled his car because water got in and he had to get an insurance claim on that. So, yeah, avoid water if you can as far as, flooded water, because you just don't know. There's a good chance that won't happen, but if your car has been, is old and it's the seals can be broken and maybe you didn't get that checked out. So after Hurricane Ian, which was 2 years ago now, it flooded approximately 4,000 electric vehicles in the States. It's between 3,000 and 5,000, so I took 4,000 as the figure, okay? 600 were declared total losses, which is 15%. 36 of those caught fire, or less than 1% of the vehicles that were flooded. So now, 1% doesn't seem like a lot, but if it's going to burn down your house, that is an extremely high 1%, and you don't want to fool around. You want to keep it away from your structures, park it on the street or the end of the driveway, and then get it checked out to make sure it's okay, which you can do at your local dealership very quickly. So they will.
36 out of 4,000. That's a real number. That is cars catching fire.
But there's still a very dangerous risk of your parking near a home or garage. But CATL, which is, as we know, the world's biggest battery maker, some of the vehicles made in North America have those batteries from China. And they put out a video about their batteries and water just yesterday, so I thought I would play that clip.
First of all, you can be assured that, under most circumstances, electric vehicles are able to wade through water because the wading capacity of EVs is higher than that of a fuel car due to its absence of intake, exhaust port, and engine. In addition, the battery pack is also designed to be extremely waterproof. We have increased the waterproof rating of our battery packs from the industry standard IPX7 to the higher IPX8 degree. During testing, we subjected our battery system to 36 hours of comprehensive vibration conditions followed by 48 hours of submersion. In conclusion, electric vehicles have safety measures in place that guarantee you need not to worry about driving through moderate deep water in case you get caught in extreme conditions.
So they are designing these packs to be hermetically sealed and hydraulically sealed so that dust and air and water don't get in. But if it happens, I mean, you can actually drive through water technically more than a gas car can, because you don't have to worry about the air intake and the tailpipe. And, some vehicles like the Rivian and I think maybe the Tesla Cybertruck, they were initially promising that it could go through, 1.5 meters of water or something like that, which is like 4 feet or something.
Yeah, you can actually pressurize the battery as well as sealing it. You can pressurize it so that it helps keep water out.
And I imagine, and I hope, and it seems possible that they would have a sensor on that pressure so that you would know if you're if you should not go through water, or if you have to worry about your vehicle being flooded.
So it sounds like the biggest danger would be seawater and sitting in seawater for a very long time, especially if your car is older. But just getting it wet and having it dry off again, probably not a big deal.
Yeah, and it's no problem to go to a car wash, as people on the street ask me about. Or plugging it into the rain. You're not holding a high voltage line in your hand. It is not doing anything until it communicates to the car, and then the system powers up from there. So not a problem. Brian, we're very, very excited this week. We've been talking about this for literally years, and the day has finally arrived. We are announcing our Patreon program and YouTube memberships. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hit a membership option down below and get some perks. Basically, people have been supporting our show with PayPal, but they've got nothing in return other than our love, which is silent and hard to feel, especially across continents. So yes, with this, you'll actually get perks and things that if you contribute to the show, you'll get stuff back. And we're not taking anything away from our current listeners. If you don't want to and you can't contribute, that's fine. Nothing will change. But we do want to sort of reward the people who support us and give them a reason to support us, because they'll get some stuff back. So Patreon and YouTube memberships are coming, and we've got a Discord server up and running, and I've spent a lot of hours on it because it hasn't been working, hasn't been hooking up with YouTube and Patreon the way it was supposed to, and my daughter's been working on it for a lot. I'm going to have to pay her. She's an expert, and she knows too much, and she listened to our podcast last week because I didn't think she would, and well, she did, because I said I'd mentioned her, and then she went and listened to it, and then put some sarcastic things in the Discord server. She's a teenager about what I had said about her. One thing was that I visualized her. Didn't want to visualize how many hours she spent on there. This is a clip, Brian, of the Patreon creators a few years ago explaining what Patreon is. Maybe you don't know what it is. Maybe you support some other podcasts or creators or artists or other things through Patreon, but maybe you've never heard of it, and this is for you.
We're using the idea of patronage, which is actually a really old idea.
Exactly, Jack. If it weren't for patrons, we wouldn't have Romeo and Juliet or Mona Lisa. Mozart, Shakespeare, Da Vinci, they all had patrons, mostly aristocrats who paid them to create so they could enjoy their works and brag to their friends about how cool they are for supporting creators.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that, but better. Creators of every kind allow their fans to become patrons or members. Patrons set a monthly subscription-style payment for the level of membership they want. Like for $5 a month, you get early access to content. $10 a month, extra videos. $20 a month, behind-the-scenes stuff. You name it.
Join the Clean Energy Show's Clean Club with a YouTube channel membership or on Patreon and support climate programming. On Patreon, you can be a supporter of our work for just $2.50 a month. Not only will you receive the unlimited love of Brian and James, you will gain access to our members' Discord server, and your podcast listening will always be ad-free. But the boys' favorite tier is the Clean Club, which costs only $5 per month. For a Finsky, you get everything from the supporter tier, slightly more love from Brian and James, and members-only bonus content, early access to the weekly podcast, whether it's audio or video, behind-the-scenes content, and a very special monthly bonus podcast from Brian and James. This special podcast episode is made to reward those who support the show with memberships.
So, we have the supporter tier. This is the tier that is low priced. If you just want to support the show, you don't care about perks, or maybe you can't afford anything more, this helps support the show and our cause, which is spreading climate information and how the climate can proceed to be fixed by technology, and it's always going to be ad-free. If we have ads one day, and we probably will, then you'll get ad-free podcasts, and you'll get access to our Discord community, and occasional posts of behind-the-scenes content, and lots of love from us, lots of appreciation and thanks.
So if I understand that clip correctly from the Patreon creators, that we're like Da Vinci and Shakespeare? Is that what they're saying?
There's no difference, Brian. There's no difference. There's no distinction. And then there's the Clean Club, our favorite tier. That is the $5 tier. This is all in U.S. funds, I'm afraid. If you're from another currency, Patreon does their things in U.S. funds, the tiers, and then it gets translated to wherever you are. That's our main tier. This is when you start getting lots of stuff. You get everything from the supporter tier, plus a written text credit on our weekly video podcasts, thanking you for your support, and early access to the main video or audio podcast, whichever you like, or both. You'll get early access, at least as soon as it's hot, the audio podcast, as soon as it's out of the oven, you'll get it. And a monthly bonus podcast, which we're already brainstorming and will do very soon. Once a month, you'll get that bonus podcast. I have no idea what's going to happen with that, but I'm kind of excited about it.
No, it's fun. We already have a couple of ideas there, and looking forward to doing that.
So what else do we have, Brian, with the higher tiers?
So Clean Club Executive is $20 a month. And with that, you get a verbal shout out on every weekly audio and video podcast and your name in the credits. And this is the best thing. You get to name all future illegitimate children that James has.
That's a privilege. I mean, if you have a business, you could name it Chevron. The people at Chevron should be donating to our show.
Yeah. And I'll point out, too, that really on any of those tiers, you can actually change the dollar amount as long as it's more than the one that's listed. So if you don't care about perks, you can actually, the $2.50 a month, you could change that to $20, $30 or whatever if you don't need the perks. And really all of those levels, the $20 a month, if you love the podcast so much that you want to give more, you can give more to the show, just as long as you write in an amount that's more than $20, but that's possible at every tier.
So we have the $2.50 tier. That's the supporter tier. Then there is the Clean Club, which is the main tier that has most of the perks. But then if you keep going, there's the Clean Club Plus, which gives you a bit more. That gives you a once a month shout out on our podcast and video podcast, verbal shout out, and you're in the credits of the videos as well. So yeah, thanks to everyone who has supported the show in the past. You can keep doing that if you prefer. Some people have set up monthly PayPal things, but you can also stop that and switch it over to either YouTube memberships or Patreon. The show notes will always have your links to get to those things. And we do hope and pray that people will support the show, because I need supporting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, if you want to contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, to let us know what you think about our perks, or if they should be tweaked, or if you're having any problems. We could have some growing pains at first, especially with the Discord server getting up and running, but everything else should be okay. It'll be a learning curve, but yeah, we're giving out extra stuff now and rewarding the people who support our show.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to do the show every week, especially for James, who does all the editing for all the different platforms and everything. But, we've been doing it basically almost for free for the last 4 years, because we love doing the show. We love spreading good news about, climate technology. And we're going to keep doing it. If you can't afford to support us, that's fine. But if you can, that's even better. More love from Brian and James.
We have an unlimited supply, at least as far as I know. You can also leave us a SpeakPipe message on line voicemail at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. And let's get on with more things now.
All right. From Canary Media, tech firms are getting together to try and build concrete that is less carbon intensive. So we talk about this every once in a while on the show. Carbon content in concrete can be quite extreme. The United States makes 90 million metric tons of cement every year to build buildings and bridges and other infrastructure. And in the process, the U.S. cement plants generate huge amounts of CO2 gases. It's equivalent to about 16 million gas-powered cars. That's the carbon footprint of just the U.S. Plants that make cement. So it is something that probably can be fixed and needs to be fixed. Globally, constructing and operating buildings accounts for more than a third of greenhouse gas emissions. So if we can manage to make the cement part of it carbon neutral, then it'll be the operating costs are going to be the thing that we're going to have to worry about. So this is one of those big kind of tech spaces that a lot of money is going into this, trying to solve this problem. More than $750 million in venture capital funding for clean concrete companies has happened in recent years. And Meta, the parent company of Facebook. So we talk a lot about, unfortunately, all these AI data centers are going to be using a lot of energy and electricity, and, they're trying to figure out ways to mitigate that. Microsoft was talking about buying a nuclear power plant, for God's sakes, and getting it restarted. But it isn't just the power consumption, it's the building themselves. So Meta, as the parent company of Facebook, they've invested in Carbon Built, which is one of these companies that's trying to figure out how to make cleaner concrete. So it's a big part of the problem is replacing the industry standard Portland cement. This is the powder that's made from, limestone and other things. And that has a huge carbon footprint into creating it. And
you got to heat it, right? I believe there's a lot of heat that goes into it.
Heat at high temperatures. So if we can replace Portland cement as a powder, as a binding agent, this will go a long way to solving these things. And I have a bit of an update. So, we've been talking, we're hoping to build a rammed earth cottage at our lake property. And rammed earth is kind of similar to concrete in that it uses things like Portland cement. There is some cement powder in there, but you also use dirt and clay and sand and all that. And so we're doing a little bit of a pilot project here. We're building a ramp now in front of our house. It's a long story, but we have a bad ice problem in the winter. We're always getting ice on our front steps. And so we figured out a way to fix it is to build a ramp. So our architect that is hoping to build our cottage is doing us a rammed earth wall right now in front of our house.
What?
And
What?
we're doing a small rammed earth wall, and then the ramp will be behind
Is this
that.
him practicing?
Yes, it's a bit of a pilot
there's some
project.
bonus content for us to put on our channel. There.
Yeah, we can talk more about it, but it comes to mind because he's been showing us samples of what the wall could look like, and you can mix in different colors and everything.
I don't understand. Why are you building a wall in front of your house to build a ramp?
Well, we wanted a ramp in front of our house instead of stairs to solve the ice problem, because we can put the ramp next to the house and it's going to be covered by the overhang of the roof.
Oh, okay.
So it's not,
Where does the wall come in?
Well, there's many different ways to build a ramp, but one of the ways is to build a small wall. It's only going to be about 3 feet tall, and that will be what supports the ramp.
And will it look like your house color? I mean, how is that going to work?
It is related to the house color, but it'll look like rammed earth, which it'll have, different kind of stripes of different colors in it. So, with rammed earth, you can change the color of it depending on what kind of...
That's part of the art of making rammed earth houses, and why,
exactly.
experienced people use different materials to create a pattern, different layers as they make this form, and then they put down clay and cement powder and sort of water, and then they sort of tamp it down.
You pound it.
Yeah, you just ram it. That's the ramming part. And then you get a wall at the end.
And you get a wall at the end, and it's very much related to the story about lower carbon concrete, because he's been showing us these samples, and they're very much like concrete. They do have Portland cement, so they're not exactly carbon free, but you can vary the amount of cement, and often you put more cement in the top layer. Like if it's load bearing, you want like a harder layer on the top. But even without that, the normal rammed earth it's very hard. It very much feels like concrete.
So this architect of yours is really getting into this rammed earth thing. And I'm assuming that after he does your cottage, that other people will come forward and want a rammed earth. I mean, I would if I could afford it. I mean, that would be, I've always, dreamed of something like that. It'd be a great way to go. And there's a happiness to living in a structure like that. It's very earthy and quiet, and which is the opposite of my house. My house actually is well insulated, but it uses rigid foam insulation, and it's noisy. I can hear things inside.
The hope is that a rammed earth house is just going to be very nice to live in. It's like concrete, but it kind of breathes more. It has a softness to it because it's not just cement. There's dirt and clay and whatnot. So I'll probably give some more updates next week about our rammed earth wall that we're building for our ramp in front of the house, but it's part of the whole process.
There's no detail too small for me, Brian. I want to know all about that. Bloomberg New Energy Finance solar analyst Jenny Chase, that is pretty much the most esteemed solar analyst there is. She's been working on this for 20 years for Bloomberg New Energy Finance, or BNEF, is out with her annual mega tweet storm that has her latest opinions on the state of solar. And these are like 30 tweets long, but I want to talk about what stood out to me, what was unusual or something that I learned. There is enough land for lots of solar. Most studies suggest 1% to 2% of land would be required to generate all the solar most countries can even use. There's also loads and loads of roofs, so let's see those who oppose ground-mounted solar support higher cost roof-mounted solar. Yeah, because you're doing it on a roof, it costs more per watt, because large, huge fields of it are a lot cheaper than mounting it to your roof and getting permits and things like that. Solar thermal tower and heliostat designs, especially with molten salt storage, are still not working very well. These are the experimental things in the desert. There was one even up in Medicine Hat that shut down. It was too cold and snowy up here. These are where mirrors, shine on a tower, or sometimes on a horizontal pipe. They'll have horizontal mirrors around those pipes. We might even end up using molten salt for multi-day and seasonal storage, but heat it with PV. So what she's saying is the molten salt might be a pretty good idea because you can store that with those types of things, but maybe we should heat it with electricity from a PV panel, not using a mirror to heat something with the sun, but use the electrons to create electric, heat.
Yeah, well, given how well solar PV works and given how the cost of those solar panels is dropping every year, this kind of concentrated mirror thing made more sense maybe 20 years ago when, solar PV was a lot more expensive. But molten salt can still be a storage medium, a heat storage medium.
The thing is that these things are storing it, which makes it last longer or even around the clock, which is I'd never heard that before. That's a good idea. Do that, but with PV. So number 42 of her tweet says floating solar is a thing. She's mentioned that last year as well, but it's not a new tech. It's solar on a boat. And it's mostly about having a place to put the modules. And when it's on a hydro dam reservoir, a grid connection is right there. Grid connections are like gold dust to the power industry. So hadn't thought about that. My son, like I said last week, went on a tour of the Diefenbaker Dam. I've looked at the pictures when I went up to see him in Saskatoon. He showed me the pamphlets, and I had a lot of questions. But there's this large area that's all reservoir, and you could float solar on it and connect it to the grid because there is a big grid connection right there. And there's less and less water. So, yeah, because that hydro dam may not even be putting out as much as it should. Sounds like, this year is a particularly bad year. He said it was like a quarter of what they expected for this month. And that happens with droughts.
Yeah, and the floating solar can also prevent some of the evaporation as well. So you're going to lose less water.
That's correct. Nigeria is another market to observe closely. In 2023, the government briefly removed subsidies on gasoline for the country's fleet of private generators, which is much larger than its central power grid. There's more gas generators in people's homes and businesses than there is in the power grid. So that is ripe for solar. Although gasoline subsidies were reinstated, PV sales continue steadily because people realized it was such a good idea. So they removing the subsidies for gasoline was a big deal. But now, people realize solar works and they're still doing it. It's not slowed down. Number 32, originally, ordinary people have no idea how much progress we've made. Tell people at parties that the UK carbon emissions from 2023 were at their lowest level since 1879, for example. They won't believe you. Most developed economies are now reducing carbon emissions without lowering the quality of life. Decarbonizing aviation is hard, she says. The CEO of Lufthansa said in 2023 that running its fleet on sustainable aviation fuel made from electricity would take half Germany's current electricity demand. BNEF thinks it's even more than that. They think that's an underestimate. Electrification of transportation is far better than biofuels, she says. For example, it takes about 300 acres of farmland to run a petrol car on corn ethanol, viz. An electric car running on about 1 acre of PV. I figured out what my solar outputs in a year, and it was like 14,000 kilometers or something worth of, I drive small cars. I don't drive pickup trucks that are electric, but yeah. So BNEF's New Energy Outlook modeling doesn't want to just solve the intermittency problem with loads of batteries. This is because the batteries get lower utilization rates the more you build. Batteries cannibalize batteries, just like solar is cannibalizing solar, long before you get to 100% clean power. Now, I would say, why is that a problem? Because the batteries will only last longer if you utilize them less. You may not make your money back. That's kind of the issue. If you're an investor, you want to sell your battery power and make that money back at a certain time, but the batteries will last longer the less you use them.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us on to our next story here from Australia. It's just going to be a challenge, as we know, to balance all of these new things on the grid. And one of the issues we've talked about before is when you have something like coal power or nuclear power, it's always talked about as very good base load power. And that's, always stated as one of their benefits. Now, there's issues to that because they often have to go down for maintenance and things like that. So they're not as good as at base load power as people suggest. But there's an interesting story here from Renew Economy. Australia's biggest coal generator, AGL, has reported success with a groundbreaking initiative that will allow it to shut down coal units in the middle of the day, making way for rooftop solar and large-scale solar to dominate the grid during the day. So this has been one of the problems. You can have too much power on the grid. Well, guess what? They figured out you can actually just turn off these coal power plants. Now, I imagine it's not that easy. It's a process called two-shifting, meaning it takes a unit offline and when it brings it back online within a 12-hour period. So this is just something they were not used to doing and basically kind of had to learn how to do it. They usually just keep these things running 24 hours a day. So this milestone of a successful trial of this was reported by the AGL operations at Bayswater, who said the team had learned from a visit last year to Ratcliffe Coal Power Station in the UK, which switched off for the last time on Tuesday morning. As we talked about before, there is now no coal power in the UK. They're basically we're the home of coal power after 143 years. So this Australian team, was able to visit this last coal power station in the UK to get some of their data from this or, learn something from it. So it says here, our team desynchronized 20 seconds ahead of the 10 a.m. target and resynchronized within 50 seconds of the 3 p.m. target. This level of precision on our first attempt is extraordinary and sets a new benchmark for our operations. So, this seems like a bit of a real sea change where, coal plants can actually be shut down during the day and may have to be. We talked about they may have to shut down rooftop solar in Australia because there's too much of it. This is another option.
Right. And, China is talking about paying coal companies, coal power plants for shutting down just to keep them on standby. Droughts were an issue where they needed more power last year. Now that's not an issue anymore. But yeah, they were paid. They were subsidized by the government to shut down. So it is possible. And they're sort of using it as a backup, like we use natural gas as a backup in North America to a high renewable system. Anyway, I did happen to watch or listen to a bit of the Energy Transition Show with Chris Nedler this morning at the gym, and he's got a paid podcast. He had the host of The Driven, or the creator of The Driven, which is Australia's electric, if you will, and very, into the history of renewables in Australia. I knew a lot about it. And he said that turbines at coal plants they're looking at, because of this problem that you spoke of, they're looking at using the turbines to consume the power. So instead of generating the power, they would take power from the grid and run in reverse and just eat up that excess power. We're going to have to do a lot of things like that, a lot of creative things. And it's all a mix. There's no easy solution. It's a balancing act and tweaking all kinds of different things.
Yeah, and every grid, of course, is going to be different. One grid is going to have 20% coal. Another one's going to have 40%. Another one's going to have lots of solar. Another one's going to have no solar. So there's no one solution for everybody, but it is definitely a solvable problem.
It's time for the lightning
The
round.
lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy and transportation.
The Fully Charged Show, in conjunction with Stop Burning Stuff, did a survey about EV ownership. 99% would recommend a battery electric vehicle if asked. 93% would not switch back to internal combustion engine. 9 out of 10 are satisfied with their current vehicle. So it's everybody who buys an EV loves it and doesn't want to go back, even if it's ridden with bullets because whatever reason, America.
Yeah. Once you go electric, you never go back.
Cruise's failure to disclose the fact that a pedestrian was seriously injured when one of its driverless vehicles in San Francisco last year, that's Cruise owned by GM, has now resulted in a $1.5 million fine from the federal government. Last October, Cruise vehicle hit a pedestrian and dragged her 20 feet as she was initially struck by a human driver in a hit-and-run incident. So she was hit and then put in front of the Cruise vehicle. The Cruise vehicle did not respond as it safely would have. It was one of those weird situations that they have to figure out. In recent weeks, and didn't predict in advance, Cruise has made the first tentative steps towards resuming operations in the Bay Area. This has been quite some time since they've stopped, and the company has deployed manually driven mapping vehicles in Sunnyvale and Mountain View with the goal of progressing to supervised testing later this fall. And it has also restarted in a number of other cities, including Phoenix, Houston, and Dallas. This is from Canary Media. The U.S. has never restarted a decommissioned nuclear reactor until now. Earlier this week, Holton International closed a $1.5 billion loan from the U.S. Department of Energy's Loans Program Office to do just that. That's the office that's trying to get nuclear going. The money will help finance the reopening of the 805-megawatt Palisades nuclear generating station in Covert Township, Michigan. So I'm okay with that. My daughter said I came out too harsh against nuclear when she listened to one episode of our show. I get that.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah.
I can't be. I gotta tell it like it is. You got to know the facts. GM has confirmed that the Equinox EV LT, that's the low-priced one that's supposed to start at $35,000 US, has begun arriving at U.S. dealerships. Something I'm interested in because it would be a nice step up. Not going to get it, but I like the way it looks. It looks pretty good, I think, for a GM vehicle. It's now the cheapest EV in America with 300 miles of range or more, and with tax credits that can be had for under $30,000. We'll see what it comes with. Maybe nothing. I don't know. It's $8,500 cheaper than the next model level up. This is a CES Fast Fact. Solar power capacity installed around the world every 3 days is roughly equivalent to all the world's solar that existed at the end of 2005. So all the solar in the world in 2005 is now installed in the world every 3 days. Coal power is officially off for good in the UK, as you've mentioned. This is from Carbon Brief. Replacing a gas boiler with a heat pump in the UK cuts emissions by 77 to 86%. And that includes the embodied emissions from manufacturing the heat pump. And it would only take 13 months to get rid of those embodied carbon emissions to offset them. From Bloomberg, California Governor Gavin Newsom has vetoed a bill that would require gas stoves sold in the states to come with warning labels about air pollution emissions and health risks. He's vetoed it.
Yeah.
What's going on with him?
There was a lot of announcements about California this week, and California has always been at the cutting edge of warning labels. You'll sometimes see warning labels on products from California that you don't see warning you of some carcinogen. I think people need to be
warned about gas stoves because they may not realize it, and it's a real thing. We talked about a listener writing in about asthma last couple weeks ago now. Germany added 200 megawatts of balcony solar in the first half of 2024. Regulations limit those systems to just 800 watts, enough to power a small fridge, but the cumulative effect is nudging the country towards its clean energy goals because so many people have gone out to the store and bought these systems and attached them to their balconies and their apartments and their condos, and it's making a difference. TheGuardian.com, this is from them, recycling rate has fallen in the United Kingdom as just 44% of household waste is recycled. Come on, United Kingdom, you can do better than that. Chinese startup WeRide is going to offer robotaxis on Uber, the Uber system, starting in the United Arab Emirates. Curious that they're starting there. Sounds like a sneaky way to get into the world and maybe spread from there. Chinese startup says that they will be offering WeRide's robotaxis first in Abu Dhabi by the end of this year. The partnership does not involve the U.S. and Chinese markets so far. And finally this week, the year we started this podcast, Brian, in 2020. A lot has happened since then. If you've listened to the show, you know that we can't barely cover it in 1 week. We don't. We cover only part of it. That year, 2020 Chinese government industrial plan estimated that around 20% of car sales would be EVs in 2025. That includes plug-in hybrid. So they had this ambitious plan that people poo-pooed. I remember the Alberta government poo-pooing it, saying they're not going to do that. In July of this year, Brian, over 50% of cars sold in China were new energy vehicles like EVs and plug-in hybrids and a handful of hydrogen vehicles, low non-emitting vehicles, and 50%, that's 2.5 times what their bold estimate was going to be.
Yeah,
And
bold estimate of 20. Yeah, it's still growing quickly, but yeah, 20% estimate, and turned out to be already over 50%. And it's not even 2025 yet. This is a year early. It's already gone from 20% to a 50% reality. That's amazing. All right. And on that happy note, that's our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Around social media, it's Clean Energy Pod. And there are videos of the show on TikTok and YouTube, including special content not featured on the podcast.
Yeah, we're even on Instagram now with the full podcast. The full podcast is on all those platforms. It's restricted to an hour, though, so sometimes that content will be trimmed down. We have the Clean Energy Store, which is another way you can support our show. It is now not selling the products at cost, Brian, but selling it with a profit. So if you want to support the show and get something in return that is not one of those perks, maybe you want a shirt, maybe you want a pullover or a hat or a mug or a sticker.
Yeah.
You can get something in return that is actual merchandise, and a few bucks goes to us and supports the show. And some of those tiers on our memberships will actually give you a significant discount on that merchandise, so you can get the merchandise without because you're already supporting the show. You don't have to support us again. You just pay the cost of the merchandise. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you don't mind. You can still donate on PayPal, but please, people, check out our Patreon page. It's linked there in your show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can get a YouTube membership if you're a YouTube person and support us that way. The tiers are almost identical to the Patreon tiers, not quite the same, and I think there might even be a little bit cheaper starting tier there, but you might get a bit less. So that is an option for you as well, to get shows early, to get our bonus content and stuff. We do appreciate you listening, and we will see you again next week on the podcast.
See you next week.
Join the Clean Energy Show's Clean Club with a YouTube channel membership or on Patreon and support our weekly climate programming. Get early access to all our videos and podcasts, as well as members-only bonus content, Discord server access, and a monthly bonus podcast from Brian and James. The Clean Energy Show is released every week wherever you get audio, as well as YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram.